One final presentation by Sukhi Gill, who is the CTO of DXC Technologies. That is a merger between CSC and HP Enterprises, and is one of the leading IT services for end-to-end solutions. He is responsible for UK, Ireland, and Israel, which I find quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. It seems like an odd mixture. But what he's going to talk about is future trends, talking about opportunities, but also threats. So this might be the scary session. So I will hand to Sukhi, who's going to give his views on the subject. Thanks.
So yes, the last slot. Pleased to see quite a few people still here. I'm not used to presenting at a lectern. I normally move around, but I'm not mic'd up, so I'm going to stay here and sort of also try and keep us on time. So the UK, Ireland, Israel has actually become Middle East and Africa as well, effective sort of Monday. So we weren't just picking on Israel, right? It's just how we organize our company in terms of the region verticals. So my role is the leading edge of our portfolio in this IT services company. It does have a sort of legacy context of working with IT, but where we're massively orienting is to work with business. So I think this was covered earlier in the day, but 2/3 of the spend on technology is no longer with IT. It's actually in the business. And I think 28% of that is with CMO organizations. So increasingly, you know, the weapons of mass disruption, let's call them, the digital technologies that exist in the marketplace today are being exploited, and there were examples of that through the talk today. But there's a dark side to this as well, one where cyber threats are also increasing in the same amount of innovation and threat level as some of the innovation in how we use this. And I'm going to try and cover both of those in my presentation. I'll start really with a little bit of a video on what's going on in the market.
Bad guys aren't what they used to be. They're still bad, but now they're also invisible. Lurking, hacking, destroying, before you even know they were there. And the only way to beat them is to be them. That's why we know how they think, where they live. And since they're online, we're online. Preventing attacks before they start, and disrupting and managing them if they do. It's a new world where no one is safe. That's why, when it comes to security, you have to be bad to be good. Think like a bad guy.
And you're seeing a lot of this in a media sort of explosion on events that are happening in the marketplace. So I personally was involved in the TNT meltdown. So that was 7 days on site with that customer. And even if you try and keep it out of the media, when the trucks are queuing up on the highway, unable to get into the depots, that hits the press. You know, people say, why are traffic jams on the A5? Well, it's because the TNT trucks cannot get into the depot. Something's gone wrong. And in that particular scenario, it was part of the WannaCrypt virus. But, you know, everything went down. There was no voice communications through Skype. So you end up having to pull everybody together. So the important learning from that for particularly that customer was, are you rehearsing what happens and what needs to happen when an event like this takes place? Now, historically, I think a lot of enterprises have tried to build a castle structure which says it will never happen to us. And, you know, if you just pick that one example, you know, the NHS, was attacked at the same time, so hospitals were cancelling operations. You've got Talk, where the police are doing investigations around some of the vulnerabilities and the data breaches. This really now needs to become a rehearsed event at board level, where the discussion is, what will we do when it happens to us, not if it happens to us. And I think that's the thing that most large enterprises are still not shifting to. Their view is, it'll never happen to us. The vast majority of enterprises we talk to, I think they need to shift to the model of, what will we do when it happens to us? And so our take on this is, there needs to be a shift to cyber resilience, and anti-fragility is the point we'll cover through the presentation. So for a brand conference like this, I think there's already an acceptance, and several times today I've heard the points around trust, integrity, believing in the brand, but there's nothing that impacts that brand more quickly than customers saying, oh, they've just lost my data, or what just happened there? Do I still trust them? Should I switch my bank account? Or should I, since the parcels might not be delivered for a while, I have no choice but to shift to another provider. And when consumers and businesses, business to business scenario, shift, they may not come back to your brand. So there's lasting damage of that. So customer confidence is impacted significantly, but it also has a hard impact in share value, in market value, and you see that in some of the breaches that took place that were mentioned on the previous slide. At the same time, though, the world isn't stood still. Digital, and I think it's an overused term, but the digital disruptors in the marketplace, some have been mentioned at the conference today, like robotic process automation or artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence isn't, like magic. It's a progression of data from the data we hold today to data we can get access to structured and non-structured data in video format, let's say, data that will come from sensors. So that whole progression of data does lead you to machine learning and artificial intelligence type scenarios. And these are mainstream. Most large enterprises are now doing something around AI type projects. But the traditional sort of digital scenarios where application development has now shifted from the 6-month release to the daily, if not hourly, by the minute. I mean, there's some crazy quotes in the marketplace where, every 12 seconds, I think there's a release from Amazon for some of their microservices in the back end. Employees increasingly are bringing their own devices to work because they feel they have better technology at home than they probably get provided in the office. So 90% of employees are using personal devices, even if they're not allocated. Even if they're allocated cool kit at work, they tend to use their own phones and so on. Some estimates, they vary from 50 billion to 20 billion, but let's say 28 billion IoT devices will be connected to the internet by 2020. These things increasingly have operating systems and are a threat surface of their own that need to be handled. We were talking to Network Rail recently where, traditionally you want to move the sort of tracks on points and people pull the levers. Well, now these things are software and machinery that automatically does it. Well, if you don't start thinking about the vulnerabilities that are inherent within the operating systems in the devices, then that can be attacked. So there's critical infrastructure implications of these IoT devices that typically have emerged in the operational technology domain, but because there's a drive to access the data from these devices, access the data so you can do the analytics and the machine learning and so on, they're connecting to the IT domain. So that's where the vulnerabilities start crossing over from sort of air-gapped operational technology domains into the IT domain. Here's another challenge, though. There's a widening skills gap in what's required to enable these and then also secure them. So there are estimates that there are roughly 1 million cybersecurity job vacancies out there at the moment, and this is increasing. The more worrying factor is that the guys who are really good at security are choosing to go work for the bad guys, and that there are lucrative there's money to be made, lucrative sort of models that are attracting people into the dark side of that domain. So the risk surface is evolving and increasingly complex. That adversary is highly innovative and sophisticated, as I said, and being funded. The enterprise, though, cannot put its head in the sand and ignore this disruption. The thing about the disruptors is they demand a response. So I like the example from Aston Martin of Case, where they're responding to electrification of vehicles and autonomous vehicles. Now, you know, a company that builds petrol cars, a V8 and V12, a sort of iconic brand, has to have a response to that shift to electric. It can't just ignore it. Now, you have to decide whether you're going to accentuate the positives of that in your brand or mitigate the negatives. So all disruptors are not in the control of large enterprises or governments. The disruptors are going to happen. It's what you choose to do about that disruption. Accentuate the positive, mitigate the negative. And on the mitigate the negative side, I think this whole issue about data, privacy, security is often not looked at when people are running to do digital projects. I work with many now businesses shifting to sort of line of business and the CMO organizations, and let's prototype something quickly, let's get it up there, let's get a pilot group. And rarely do the conversations around regulatory compliance and security come in that early phase. The problem is, by the time you've piloted it and you want to scale it, it's too late to try and tag the security pieces in, because they become a constraining factor. So my suggestion here is involve security early into those workshops. Treat them as an enabler. I know that's difficult sometimes to believe, but there are tools, technologies out there that could enable some of your scenarios in the business to actually go faster with the right security trained people involved. The regulatory pressures obviously are there as well. So GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, May 2018 this year goes live. That's implications worldwide for anybody who's data about European citizens. So these are seen as additional costs and complexity that are being added. And that's just a general data regulation. There are industry-specific regulations that still involve humans looking at screens to do audits of sort of transactions in the finance sector. A lot of that can be automated and looked at from a security perspective as added value as we sort of start looking to look at the data about what people are doing. So from a World Economic Forum, I know the minister spoke this morning. Unfortunately, I missed his talk, but it was interestingly that our Prime Minister chose to actually also address this topic about the opportunities that technology faces, technology can provide, and almost to try and get trust back in to the general public that technology has advantages, can drive productivity, and deal with some of the implications of what that does to workforce, but also manage the cyber security implications of all of this. So it was a sort of telling point that of all the things you could have talked about, this was one of the topics that was covered at World Economic Forum. Now, the only geeky slide I wanted to sort of talk through here was this shift from traditional castled structure where we built our own data centers, our own infrastructure and so on, and we held data about users, apps, etc. within a center. That boundary has disappeared. If it hasn't disappeared yet, it will soon. The economics of cloud, mobile first, drive you beyond the walls of your castle to a much broader set of uses of technology. Technology services from people like Facebook who are here, but also Amazon, Microsoft Azure. These sort of cloud services will dominate as the first choice of where you'll build stuff. Why? Because they represent the systems of innovation today. What we're holding mostly within large enterprises is the systems of record, how we've tackled sort of consumers and the data we have about them. You need to blend both. So the issue then becomes, so how do I protect my brand when the data I hold about my customers and my applications is no longer contained within a well-defined sort of boundary? It's actually scattered all over the place. So that's the real challenge going forward. You have to start focusing on the identity and the data, not the physical servers and the physical devices. By the way, they have to be protected. You have to have antivirus on them. You've got to keep them patched, up to date with the operating systems. But you've got to now also focus on their data and the interaction of that data with the users and protect that. So data in transit as well as data at rest, wherever that may be. So from a risk versus opportunity, I didn't realize Mr. Zuckerberg had said this, but I've actually been saying for a while. When somebody said, you keep quoting Mark Zuckerberg, and I went, I didn't realize, right? So the biggest risk that some of the enterprises face today that I deal with is they're risk averse. And in a digital world, you cannot be risk averse. You need to take managed risk opportunities. And so you need a portfolio of traditional projects that are handling your product or your service, whatever you're doing, but you also need a set of projects that are looking at these technology disruptors and trying to navigate them, accentuate the positive, mitigate the negative. So I think I agree. The biggest risk is not taking any risk in a world that is changing really quickly. And the only strategy that's guaranteed to fail is not taking these risks. But I think you have to take them in the context of an enterprise risk strategy, which is addressed at board level. It's not within the IT department, it's not within the business units. It's a recognized sort of risk. And so this whole concept of let's try something, fail fast, but let's involve the regulatory side as well as the security side in those conversations early on. So there's still a strong view that the security team will be the no, or the legal and the commercial guys when they get involved. All they will say is, no, you can't do this. And I'd like to argue the opposite. I think that the digital leaders who are managing this risk and opportunity and are actually trying to work out how to do this, if you said to somebody from security or regulatory compliance, here's an opportunity, I think this is why it's good for the company, help me do this, help me understand how I can navigate this, I think you'll find a different response from the security professionals in your organization or from partners that you use to do security. But that understanding of sensing the market, understanding those opportunities, but then taking a risk-based approach which says, let's try this in a prototype or a pilot group and then grow it from there, recognizing what that does to the enterprise security, the enterprise risk of the company. And I do want to just clarify, risk is a business problem, it's not a technology IT problem. Technology can mitigate some of those risks, but the business have to decide where that risk is, and hence the I think the quote of the enterprise really has to start taking risks. So one of the things we're seeing really early on in some of the scenarios we're working with the business is that the business truly has shifted to work like a startup. Not everywhere, but they recognize that this whole startup wave of doing things really quickly and trying them works. And I personally went through this journey. I worked on a spin-out while I was still part of HP. And so 7 months based out of Sunnyvale, California. And I can tell you, we were building a product like Slack. It was a little bit behind Slack, which is why it didn't continue to get funded. But we were shocked how quickly Marriott Hotels and Reuters news agency, the business was willing to use these products because they felt it was giving them an advantage in federating news or building hotels. And I, as an enterprise sort of software developer, was like, yeah, but it doesn't really work, you know, and it's not quite complete. And they was like, yeah, but we're willing to try it. But they weren't trying it for the whole business. They were doing controlled pilots. Understand. And so what we felt is actually being fully transparent on what worked and didn't was actually to our advantage. There's no point pretending which bits didn't work. We told them, these bits are not going to work. Don't click on that bit yet, right? But this bit does work, so trial it out. So I think the digital leaders who are open and transparent about the opportunity, and then also willing to take that calculated risk in a controlled way, will be the winners in this. Those who want all of the risks to be mitigated before they go forward will actually be the laggards and will fail. Now, the last point I want to make. It isn't just for the digital leaders or the board. The biggest vulnerability is the users themselves, end users of your systems, as well as your employees. The biggest challenge by far that we see is phishing type attacks through email for end users. So awareness campaigns, really important for people to understand that the threats are increasing and they need to be aware and knowledgeable about these social engineer attacks. So I've tweeted about being at Brand Finance today. So if somebody sent me an email on my way home that was from Brand Finance and it looked like it came from Georgie or Dave, I'd probably click on it. That's how sophisticated these hackers are. They can easily work out who you are, where you are, and use that to your disadvantage. So it's hugely important to be conscious and look at systems in the back end that can support that. So that's what we do. So you're going to allow me a little bit of a marketing video right at the end. So, you know, it's all about what you personally do, not just about what the leaders need to do in security. So start today. Understand the importance and implications of this security, privacy, compliance on brand value, reputation. In all of these early digital disruptive projects involve the security. Build it to the fabric of your organization, both on the innovation side as well as on the traditional. Partner with security organizations. So go away with this question. What would you do when you are breached? Do you know what you would do? And as a marketing and brand organization, you're at the heart of that when it happens. And one example recently was an outsourcing to a Norwegian health authority, which is really, you know, if you want to look at the biggest social sort of health, one of the biggest social health organizations, Norway is one of those. And what has happened is they've embraced outsourcing late. But one of the early questions we asked them was, what happens when the breach happens? And they said, oh, well, we will handle that. We didn't even have a breach. The risk came up, which is there may be people in India who have access to data, health data. And that quickly became an issue in the press that then was a struggle to handle. So you have to do this proactively and handle it. We covered educate and communicate. So just a quick 30-second video.
Security is really the number one enabler or potentially the number one inhibitor of digital. And so that's why security is so important in every transformation that every company goes through as they want to get to digital. Every security solution really has three pieces to it. It is people, process, and technology. And the technology piece really comes from our partner ecosystem. We have the ability to be able to provide technology-agnostic architectural design, product and solution implementation, all the way through to manage and run.